Hi again guys, and welcome to the second installment of a kind of experimental series on the channel, the first episode of which I did about probably a week to a week and a half ago, and that is HSG Online, which is some of the highlights from my racing exploits, not in lobbies but actually in sport mode in Gran Turismo, because as many of you know, that's not what I really do on the channel. I don't feature myself racing that much. I feature myself driving all the time. Pretty much all the content is that, apart from the community spotlight, but I don't race the cars. I'm usually driving them on their own or tuning them. It's never really been about me racing because that's just not really the point of the channel. There are plenty of other channels who already do that. But to see what you guys would think of something like that, not just blowing my own horn with, oh, look how many races I can win, but actually breaking down some cool events, addressing some issues or mistakes that I made, and seeing if commentary style racing might be something that some of you might like. And the response was positive, overwhelmingly positive in fact. It had good views considering that I don't usually do that, a ton of likes, some dislikes for sure, but not very many. And so this is the second installment, and as I said, this is not going to be a regularly scheduled thing. It won't necessarily be weekly, may not even be like a monthly thing. It will just pop up whenever, wherever. But this one I thought was a very interesting day to feature, because everything that you'll see in this video happened within the space of a couple of hours. And that was that I literally went from doing that first event at Le Mans in the first video. I didn't race for a few days, and now this is literally the next step in my online career. So you're watching this back to back. If you watch that first video and then watch this one, there is nothing in between. This is literally my second race up to my fifth race, because I did 4 events back to back in sport mode. It was the same event 4 times, and part of that was I wanted to experiment with how the matching system works, and I didn't actually plan to do that until I ran the race once, and it made me curious, so I decided to continue, and the result was some pretty awesome racing, in the third race in particular, and I'm going to edit it all down so that you can see some of those highlights. Now, incidentally, for those who are wondering who I signed with, I opted for Volkswagen. I've signed with Volkswagen for the events for a number of reasons. I love their cars. They don't seem to be doing that well in the manufacturer's point standings, at least last time I checked. I love to root for an underdog and represent an underdog, and also just the more oddball choice, and it seems surprising to me that more people don't drive for Volkswagen or use the Beetle, because from day one it was known as being this really OP vehicle up there with the Porsche RSR, and yet I don't see people using it anywhere near as much these days. Maybe that's why. Maybe people got sick of seeing it, but I love using it. I love the fact that the Beetle is so different to everything else on the grid, and in these 4 events there was only one other person in a Beetle in the third race, so again, you don't see the Beetle around that much, but I personally love it. Now, of course, all of these events were only 4 laps each. There was no tyre usage, fuel usage, and balancer performance was applied, so I couldn't do anything to the car. It was just as it was, straight out of the crate. But doing these races got me to thinking of something very interesting, and it's something which some people might not be happy with me bringing up, because it can potentially encourage bad behavior from certain kinds of driver, but I'm not talking about like hitting into people or causing, penalties, which also can be manipulated, because the main point in that first episode was that I was discussing, or at least one of the points, I was discussing about the penalty system, and I can certainly see why it annoys people. I got no penalties at all in these 4 events. In fact, they were amazingly clean. This time it raised another issue that I noticed, and potentially a far more important and dangerous one, and that is sandbagging. Now, I'm not sure if GT Sport has anti-sandbagging measures, and for those of you who don't know about this, I might actually end up encouraging people inadvertently to try this, and to be honest, I may try it myself once as an experiment to see if this does work, but it's certainly not my style of racing. And that is, I noticed after the first race in particular, I did my qualifying time. I was about, the middle to high end of the pack among my friends. As I've said before, I'm certainly not the fastest of drivers. I'm about 3 seconds off the pace of the top time on Suzuka in Group 3 for this event in particular. But I noticed that for the first matchup, and again, this was only the second race I've ever done in sport mode, it matched me up against people who were nowhere near quick enough. I was 2.5 seconds quicker than the car in second. That's a massive margin. Now, I'm sure that happens plenty of times for plenty of people, but it doesn't seem fair to put me in a room with all of these people who clearly cannot keep up. And the race was a testament to that. As you'll see from the highlights, I ended up winning by around 12 seconds over only 4 laps. I didn't even barely look behind at the threat because there wasn't one. Nobody was close enough to overtake. I didn't make, any kind of mistakes due to having someone breathe down my neck for the whole race. It was kind of boring. It was boring because it was so easy. Now, I'm not one to stare a gift horse in the mouth. Of course, an easy win is nice for a change. It boosts your ratings, especially when it's only the second race I've ever done. But it did intrigue me, because I wanted to see if the next race would be the same or if it would improve. So I entered again. Now, I can't recall if I improved my qualifier or not. You'll probably be able to see on screen if it did, but at most it was like maybe 0.1, 0.2 of a second, something like that. And again, as an EB driver rating of E, sportsmanship B, I qualified a 1.5 seconds faster than the next car. So a full second closer, which is good, but still that's a pretty hefty margin. And I won the race by 7 seconds. So once again, it wasn't that close. Again, never lost the lead, didn't make any mistakes because of people bearing down on me and having a really close race. It wasn't boring, but it kind of got me to wondering, how is this system working? Why isn't it matching me up to people who are actually more close? And I have a number of theories. I'm sure, of course, that the sportsmanship and drivership ratings, or the driver ratings, I should say, probably match you up against people in those classes rather than just for those times. And that would make sense, of course. You wouldn't necessarily want an EB driver going up against an A+S driver. It wouldn't really be fair. But at the same time, if he's fast enough to do that, why not? That's kind of the point. So, for whatever reasons, it matched me up against those people again. It was a pretty easy race, relatively uneventful. Then we got to the third one. Now, this third race was definitely the best. It was brilliant. I still didn't lose the lead for the whole event, but it was very close. In fact, for the first full 2 laps, the next guy, who was in a Lexus, was within 1 to 2 seconds of me the whole time. It was a great little race, and if I'd have made any kind of significant mistake, I would have lost, without a doubt, because I wasn't gaining on him. I was just maintaining that lead. So if I'd have lost the lead, I don't think I could have gained on him either. I would have just maintained the distance behind him. We were that evenly matched. But it was a fantastic race, and even in qualifying, as you'll see, I had moved up, or at least my sportsmanship rating had moved up from a B to an A, and the qualifying was so much closer. 7 cars within the 2-minute 1 second range. That's what I'm talking about. Now, of course, I loved having those clean, easy wins the first couple of times, but this is what it's all about, that closer racing, getting you matched up, and also it forces me to improve myself, which, as I said, is the part that I enjoy the most. I still won the race. I won by a 1.2 second margin, so much closer. 12 seconds for the first race, 7 seconds for the second race, 1.2 seconds, so way, way closer. And that got me to thinking, maybe the system refines itself based on the driver as you move along. So then, if that theory is true, then in the next event, I should probably drop from qualifying first to be maybe 4th or 5th compared to who it matches me up with. But it didn't. I was still first. And funnily enough, the 4th race was easier than the 3rd one, because I qualified half a second quicker than the next car, which is still very close. That's a great margin. But the race itself, it wasn't as fun as the 3rd one. It was cool. The guy behind me in I believe a BMW M6 managed to keep up pretty well, but then on lap 3 he started dropping behind a little bit, and eventually I won by about 5 seconds. So the 3rd race was definitely the standout, but the worrying thing that you could potentially exploit that this really highlighted to me was how easy it would be to sandbag, because if you drive around a lap and then just stop at the waiting line, stop at the start-finish line for like 5 seconds, and then drive over, and that's your qualifying time, then fair enough, the game could know that you're sandbagging. If, for instance, you're not using full throttle on a straight, the game could recognise that you're sandbagging. But there are so many other ways of doing it without the game knowing. For instance, just cruising around corners without going full throttle can easily add up to another 3 to 4 seconds onto a lap time, and the game wouldn't necessarily be able to recognise that because it doesn't know you well enough. So you could easily exploit the sport mode qualifying system, because certain people don't qualify at all and they just get put into events, but you could just go in, deliberately qualify 3 or 4 seconds slower than you actually are, and then get matched up with people who are that quick and destroy them easily, as long as of course they're not doing the same thing. And of course that's a fantastic way of improving your ratings, and these 4 races that I did, of course I didn't sandbag at all, but in that 3rd race in particular, that I actually managed to beat my qualifying lap, in fact all of my qualifying laps, by almost a full second, because the racing was that close and the car was so close behind me for the whole thing, because my best qualifier out of all 4 races was a 2:01.2, but on the last lap against that guy in the 3rd race in the Lexus, I did a 2-minute 0.5, which is almost a full second quicker than any of my qualifiers. So it was a fantastic little race, but the point remains that potentially you could very easily exploit the qualifying system, or at least on the surface it looks to me like you could. Now, as I've said, these are only my first 5 races that you've seen so far in the first episode and this one, so of course there are plenty of things that maybe I'm not aware of, but it would seem that that's an easy system to exploit, and I'm sure there are already some people who do, but the results of these races were, it improved my scores by a huge margin. That was fantastic to see, because although my driver rating is still, I believe, E at the moment, my sportsmanship rating within 4 races went from B to S, and I'm now an S rated driver, because of course it was easy to be. There was no close contact, I never got overtaken, and I didn't make any mistakes, so it was like a perfect run for improving your scores really quick. So I really enjoyed these 4, especially that 3rd one where it was a fantastic event. It wasn't like bumper to bumper necessarily, as many great races are, or side to side racing, but it was pretty close. Out of the 4 we were very well matched, and he didn't let up. If I'd have made a single mistake I would have lost, that's for sure. And even in the 4th race he kept up for a couple of laps, and then I think he started to maybe lose a bit of confidence because he wasn't necessarily gaining. Maybe he made a mistake or 2 and started dropping behind, but yeah, I actually enjoyed it. So as I said, sport mode is not the kind of thing I do all the time, but I hope you guys enjoyed these highlights, maybe glean some information that you can use yourself in sport mode. Don't necessarily exploit the sandbagging thing if it is possible, it's just a potential issue that I wanted to raise. And of course I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you already aware of this? Are there already countermeasures in place? Maybe there are that I'm not aware of, something to do with the class system maybe. But either way, that's it for my thoughts, that's it for the highlights of my 2nd to 5th online races in sport mode, and of course I'll see you next time, but for now, as always, thanks for watching.